Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming, and welcome to the last CA meeting of the year. Honestly, it feels like every year goes by and it could be, I don't know, 3 weeks. So thank you. When we last met, the issues on the agenda were focused on the cost of living crisis, support for businesses, and the impact of rocketing inflation on our budgets and plans. So one of the main items on our agenda today is about the inflation impacts on transport programmes, which we discussed last month at the Finance and Resources Committee. Inflation rates combined with the knock-on effects of Brexit, the pandemic and the war in Ukraine, the costs of infrastructure projects across the country have significantly increased. Our budgets are not index linked, and it's a point I keep making to government that the money we had 3 years ago is not worth the same as it is now. And it's a point I will be raising at the Levelling Up Select Committee. I'm giving evidence on Monday with Andy Burnham and Andy Street, and we'll all together, I have no doubt, be making that case. So whilst we make allowances for inflation within our budgets, the government's mismanagement of the economy over recent months means we've had to look closely at all of our projects and ensure we have a sustainable delivery plan. Every other mayoral combined authority in the country is having to do the same thing, and I'd just like to congratulate our teams being the first out of the blocks, because other MCAs are coming to us to ask us how we did it, because they are facing the same challenge. So thank you to our team to deliver that plan so we could continue with our ambitious vision for our region. Now, we've worked closely with our 5 local authorities to minimise disruption and to ensure that no part of the region is unfairly impacted. All of the schemes will still be progressed. They will be pipelined, but delivered over a longer time period. It'll mean we have projects ready for spades in the ground when we get future funding from government. And you will all be aware that more often than not, we get offers of funding from government with very short turnaround timetables. And now we will have projects ready to go and pipelined. I also wanted to briefly update members on the meeting I had with the Transport Secretary. One second, I will come to you after my opening comments. The meeting I had with the Transport Secretary last week alongside other Northern mayors. You're all well aware of the chaos that we've seen over the last few months across the north. I was able to draw the Northern mayors together in an emergency meeting to discuss this. We requested a meeting with the Minister. The Minister, in a very changing tone from the previous incumbent, was up for a conversation. So we met the Minister in Manchester, and he was open to listening. But it was very indicative of our chaos that one of the mayors couldn't get there because of transport. My train was delayed, and on the way back, the 6 carriage was cut into 3, so we were all squashed like sardines. So this chaos has to stop. It's an economic hit to our economy of 2 million a week, 8 million a week across the north. We have to find a solution. And we, as mayors, made it incredibly clear. He definitely got the message that that government must step in and find a solution, particularly on rest day working. And you will all know that if thousands of trains were cancelled in London and the South East, this will be dealt with as a matter of emergency. We expect in the north the same urgency from government. And we think that means putting TransPennine Express on notice to improve. The government must not reward this appalling level of service by signing off potentially 8 years more of this mayhem on contract extensions when they come up for renewal in May. So yesterday, we wrote to the Secretary of State to further set out that case signed by all the mayors in the north, and I hope he will take decisive action going forward. We have a new timetable coming in on the 11th, which is Sunday. It absolutely needs to work, and I would like to thank Councillor Hinchcliffe, because she and myself pressed Northern to improve and add further routes as we are building back faster on the rail network in the north and the south. And it seems that they've listened, and there will be more routes on Northern going forward. But we cannot continue with that chaos and with that delay. So moving on to the main agenda, and I will come to you when we get to the finance point, Councillor Galton. to address your point. Any apologies, Ian?
Yes, we've had apologies from Councillor Pandor, Councillor Swift and Councillor Holdsworth. We have Councillor Scott, Councillor Scullion and Councillor Galton attending as the substitutes. We've also had apologies from Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor Morley, as well as Councillor Robinson and Councillor Carter.
Okie dokie, thank you. And any declarations of interest? No, thank you. And moving on to exclusion of press and public, there are no items that are exempt today, so we don't have to ask anyone to leave. Item 4, turning to the minutes of the meeting of the Combined Authority on the 21st of October. Any comments or questions on those minutes? No, thank you. Are we all ready to confirm them as an accurate record? Thank you all so much. Okie dokie. So moving on to item 5, the economic report, a crisis in the cost of living and doing business. This provides an update on the Combined Authority's latest economic intelligence and outlines the MCA's interventions to address the cost of living crisis effects in West Yorkshire. It also presents asks of government in response to the autumn statement and in light of the cost of living crisis as a whole. We know that this recession is expected to last into 2024. Things feel really, really tough now, but economists are predicting it is definitely going to get worse before it gets better. Higher energy costs are the main driver of the downturn in economic growth. The war in Ukraine is driving up prices, compounded by the mismanagement of government. A third of West Yorkshire's residents fall within the 20% poorest neighbourhoods in England. In West Yorkshire, we already have 18% of people spending over 90% of their gross income on essential items such as food and fuel. And what is deeply shocking is the poorest 10% of households spent close to all of their income on essential goods and services. And a third of adults in our region have less than £100 in savings for those crisis moments. And our businesses, the beating heart of so much of the West Yorkshire economy, are facing huge challenges. Almost 2,000 firms in West Yorkshire are energy intensive and also operating in an internationally competitive market, facing huge pressures. Now, those businesses most at risk, 57,000 employees, and their survival is vital to our economy. It's £8 billion worth of turnover for these businesses. And when 67% of businesses in our region are concerned about their survival, that should absolutely worry us all. So we're doing what we can to address the issues facing communities. We've already announced the Mayor's Cost of Living Fund, working through local authorities to provide support to voluntary and community organisations that will help households with food, warmth and mental health support. And in addition, lowering bus fares, helping to make it cheaper for people to get around. Today, we are agreeing to further support for energy-intensive businesses, offering grant and wraparound support to reduce bills and decarbonise processes. And it also sets out what action we're taking in asking government to give us support for residents and businesses. So if I may, I'd like to pass to Alan, please, to offer further details, and then I'll go to you, Mark, to report back from the LEP board last week, where proposals were also discussed there. Thank you. Over to you, Alan.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Just to summarise a little on the economic situation, the overall summary of this is that West Yorkshire is harder hit than other parts of the country, with a greater proportion of households in fuel poverty, higher levels of deprivation, which means that those economic effects that are taking place hit our residents on average harder. And in addition, for our business community, the fact that we have higher levels of manufacturing businesses particularly means that we are facing a greater impact from those higher energy costs. So, as you say, Mark, the chair of the LEP, will come in a moment to reflect back the LEP's conversation. They had a conversation about this last week. I thought I'd turn to what we are doing about it. So, really pleased to be able to say that the scheme that was agreed at the last Combined Authority to support businesses this winter with energy efficiency measures opens at noon today. So businesses have already been expressing interest in that. They will be contacted when it launches today. So that will be immediately helping businesses to invest in energy efficiency measures that will help them with their higher energy costs this winter. In terms of the Mayor's Cost of Living Fund, which was also approved at the last combined authority, very grateful to everybody within the local authorities and the voluntary sector who have been working with us on mobilising that. Every local authority has now agreed the arrangements for the way that that fund will operate. And in particular, the kinds of things that that's going to be providing are emergency advice on debt, financial resilience and welfare, mental health support, work through community foundations, particularly helping them to provide practical help and support to people affected by the cost of living, some enabling local organisations to apply to for financial assistance, delivering programs that are enabling local groups to apply for financial assistance and provide warm and safe spaces for people, and finally providing advice around housing, jobs and so on. And the approach is slightly different depending on the local authority because it's building on what else is already in place in each place, but really good to have got that mobilised. The final thing I just wanted to add before Mark comes in is that it's just the point about the autumn statement. So attached to the paper is the letter that the Mayor sent to the Chancellor immediately before the autumn statement, which sets out some key priorities around help for businesses to bring down energy bills, delivery of Northern Powerhouse Rail in full with a new station in Bradford, commitment to a mass transit system in West Yorkshire, greater devolution to mayors to end bidding contests and so on. We will continue our dialogue with government on all of those issues, and in addition, two things that were mentioned in the autumn statement which we're following up with government. One is that the government shifted its policy on investment zones. So the original applications which were made, of which we understand there are about 600 across the country, the government is refreshing their policy on that. So we are opening a dialogue with the government around what the opportunities for West Yorkshire might be. And then the second is that they are looking at the way that MCAs are being funded, and there is a particular issue for us which has been talked about around this table many times, which is to do with the multiple funding streams that we receive. And so we are keen to engage with government on how funding can be simplified for combined authorities, building on the work that they have already started with Manchester and the West Midlands. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan. Mark?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, we had a very helpful conversation at the LEP board about this topic last week, and thought the structure was very helpful to start with the macroeconomic picture, where I think we all know the headlines. You know, CPI inflation at 11.1%, the highest it's been for 40 years. As a result, the MPC increasing base rates to 3%, and there's another meeting next Thursday, I believe, to review that further. And I think I'd like to keep highlighting something that we've talked here before about the Treasury review of the Energy Bills Relief Scheme, where that scheme comes to an end at the end of March. And the CBI this morning was highlighting that energy bills for many businesses could more than double when that comes to an end. So these are live things. To Alan's point, we spent more time then thinking about what are the implications to our region and to the businesses within our region. I think the cost of energy remains a really huge factor for households, also for businesses. It's not just the cost of energy. We're now hearing businesses talking about the resilience of energy, especially over cold snaps in winter, where power blips or power outages can have a real impact, especially amongst energy intensive businesses. I'd really like to stress, I think, something there that you mentioned in your opening, which is in point 2.15 in this paper, some research that we took on behalf of the combined authority, showing 67% of businesses in this area are concerned about their survival. That's most highlighted amongst small and micro businesses. When we look as to why, well, the debt levels amongst SMEs are about 50% higher than pre-pandemic. So the inflationary pressures and the base rate rises are hitting those SMEs harder. So I think the conversation at the LEP board, we talked about the regional response, and I think the view generally was we're doing a lot regionally to help. The emergency grants for small businesses, the emergency support for vulnerable communities, the launch of Employment West Yorkshire are all seen as very, very beneficial. And we've got a further item today item 9 about discussing further support for energy efficiency with the Business Sustainability Fund, and I'd like to sort of frame that in the context. I think the only other few points that I'd just make from the discussions of the LEP board, colleagues pointed out the importance or the impact and the importance of the voluntary and the non-profit sector in helping us get through this crisis, and how potentially larger corporates could work with those smaller voluntary organisations to make a big difference in our area. We talked extensively about skills, and not just highlighting the range of support that we have from the public sector initiatives here, but also the full range of private sector support for retraining, especially on the digital agenda. We had a long conversation about that. And also we talked about, with the rising inflation, there is a very practical point where many small businesses are likely to need to register for VAT before they thought they would otherwise, as their revenues are coming up. So that could create a backlog and some potentially unintended admin and financial consequences for businesses that we need to keep an eye on. So I'll leave it there, but thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And just to your point about voluntary, non-profit and community sector, I just want to put on record my thanks to Councillor Lewis for inviting me to the State of the City event, where community and voluntary organisations were gathered together, and the discussion about the fact that there is now the torn safety net, the safety net used to be those people who were struggling could rely on benefits, and now benefits aren't enough. So what is the safety net? Is the food bank, the energy bank, the bed bank, warm spaces, and it is those people that I hope that the Mayor's cost of living crisis money will support through local authorities to be there to catch the most vulnerable. Are there any comments on this section? Councillor Poulsen and Councillor Galton.
Thank you, Mayor. Just want to say thank you, Alan, for confirming in your remarks that it's starting at noon today on the energy efficiency. Is there still capacity for other businesses to sign up who haven't expressed an interest so far? That would be one of my questions.
Yes.
Yes, that's a nice easy one to start, isn't it? And also in 2.6, the investment zones with links to universities, I'm hoping that we are talking to some of our universities about the potential. Obviously, I'm thinking of Bradford, but I'm sure Huddersfield is probably in the mix as well, because I think there's some real huge potential there as more of this develops. So I hope we are looking at that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good shout. Yes, we are beginning those conversations, having those conversations around the links between R&D and universities and innovation zones.
Councillor Galton.
Yes, thanks, Mayor. Your presence yesterday at the cost of living meeting in Leeds was welcomed by everyone there, I'm sure, and your practical help through your cost of living fund is also very warmly received, I know, by a lot of the third sector organisations that were present around those tables looking at solutions going forward, so thank you. I was wanting to ask a question around the reference to the £5,000 grants to businesses, because I couldn't quite find out what the limit was on that fund for those grants to businesses, and to understand how many you hope to help, if there is actually a limit, or whether you will just keep on going, because there are so many businesses, aren't there, especially as has been mentioned before, at the micro end, that are integral to the success of communities within West Yorkshire, and I'm thinking particularly around the hospitality sector, who are really under pressure. But it would be really good if they had a realistic understanding of how many of them are likely to succeed in getting such a grant.
Thank you. And over to you, Phil.
Thank you for that question. So this is a emergency grant to kind of fill a time period between now and the scheme we're talking about later. The fund we've agreed for this is £1 million, so it's not limitless in terms of the numbers of businesses that we can support. And the team are expecting that clearly there's a focus on smaller businesses, and the team are expecting that we're going to support around 250 to 350 businesses in this period with this grant.
Is that helpful?
It is, because it just goes to show, actually, considering how many thousands of businesses have we got of that scale, even with £1 million, you're not going to touch the scale of what's needed, and that letter to the Secretary of State hopefully will be received effectively in terms of us getting the resources that we need locally.
Lovely, thank you. Any further comments?
No, only to say that kind of we're providing the support that we can. I mean, if we had more resources, we'd want to provide more support. So clearly, that letter's important.
And Alan?
Yeah, it's worth saying that this builds on previous programmes. So there was the ReBiz programme, which was funded with European money, which has provided a lot of support for larger businesses, and that includes provision of advice, and that programme is still running alongside this. So with this programme that we're introducing today, builds on previous programmes as well. So there are I don't have the figures, but there are lots of businesses in the region that have already benefited on energy efficiency from the support that we've been providing.
Thank you. Are we happy to approve the recommendations in this paper? Yes, we are. Thank you. Moving on to inflation transport programmes. I spoke a little bit about this at the beginning of the meeting, so I won't offer too many further comments. As I mentioned, this was discussed at FRCC on November the 10th, where it was recommended the MCA approves the projects to be pipelined as part of the inflation review. And the details are in the papers for pipeline for alternative funding sources and later delivery in order to reduce over-programming and to create headroom on our other programmes. So a total amount of savings that have been created through the pipeline of projects is just over 266 million. And I'm so grateful, as I've said before, to our 5 local authority partners for their close work on it. It was important that everybody across the region had to trim their sails, and I know it wasn't easy, and thank you, and also that other MCAs are looking to us to replicate it in their regions. So on that note, I'd like to invite Councillor Hinchcliffe as Chair of the Transport Committee to make any further comments before bringing in Melanie, who led this work.
Thank you, Mayor. I think you've given the key points there, really, in that these schemes that are paused, not stopped, I think it's important to say, because we all have still the same ambition for West Yorkshire and for all the districts within it. And we need to make sure the work continues so that when, and hopefully money will come at some point, we'll have those schemes ready to go and we can actually deliver them quite quickly, because we all know that growth is the only way out of the cost of living crisis that we've just been discussing. In fact, we need to generate growth in this region, and government needs to be alongside us, supporting us to deliver that growth. So yes, the schemes are there in front of everybody, and we will keep working on them to make sure that we have a good and viable future for them when the opportunity comes.
Thank you. Melanie, any additional comments?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to flag with you that as we did the review, we were looking at 3 criteria for all of our projects within the existing programme. So we were measuring them against financial viability, deliverability and the timescales within which they could be delivered, and strategic fit, including suitability against sustainable travel objectives as well. So we were looking at each scheme in relation to that criteria, and then in section 4 we just set out the principles as well that we were applying to this process. So what we've agreed is that wherever possible, where a project is going onto the pipeline, we will continue to do the business case development work for that scheme, and we will put it on a pipeline where we will then seek further funding from alternative sources. So we're not saying that £266 million worth of schemes are stopping. We're just trying to find alternative funding for those schemes, and we will continue to develop the business cases, which takes some time, and then we'll look at other sources. And it means that we've got better developed schemes on the pipeline that will be ready to go should funding become available. We also have a number of proposals for bus park and ride and also rail park and ride schemes. Wherever possible, we'll be looking at enhancing the corridors, but at this stage, we might not be investing in the actual parking facility, because at the moment, we need to see demand levels return to that they haven't returned yet to pre-pandemic levels. So there is an opportunity for us to review that in the future, and at the point at which that becomes viable, then we can again look at where will the funding come from and how can we progress with this. So we're continuing with business case development, but we're not looking at implementing all of the scheme, but we'll certainly look at what we can implement on corridors. So that's a point worth making. We've also got corridor improvement programmes, and the first phase, all schemes will continue because they are well on with their development, and many of them are either on site or about to go on site. So what we've tried to do in the review is do it at pace so that we're not delaying any of those projects that are ready to go on site, so that we keep that momentum. All the schemes that were in phase 2 will continue to work on the development, but we do not have funding for the implementation of those, and we will seek that funding. And then we've got other projects where we're saying that they're on the pipeline and we're taking some funding out of the existing programmes, but that is because we are already seeking funding from other sources. So we've got a couple of schemes like Tong Street in Bradford and Dawson's Corner in Leeds, where we've got outstanding funding applications with DFT for the major route network funding. So the proposal is to still continue with those schemes, but there will be the minimum match funding that is required through our existing programmes to just ease the pressure on the costs that are coming in now against the programme. So there's all the individual schemes are listed in the appendices. I'm happy to take any questions on the detail of that, but they were the principles that we've applied as we've done the review with our partner council officers. So there's quite a bit gone into it, but that's the position that we're in. Thank you.
And also the sheer size of the 266 million just shows the impact that inflation and all these other pressures have had on our budget. So opening it up to comments, Councillor Galton.
Thanks, Mayor. You were patting yourself on the back earlier about how quick we were out of the blocks in terms of getting our inflation review out there. Basically to show how effective a decision-making body this is. However, I will remind the Combined Authority that the whole point of devolution is that decision-making should be made differently, and that it should be encouraging the participation of communities which are meant to benefit from the decisions that we make. And through haste to create this inflation review, I will assume inadvertently those communities have been left out of this decision making because a lot of these schemes which have been held back, it's been a discussion between the administrations of the local authorities and the administration of the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, and it has not fully included the communities that many of these schemes travel through. And I think that's dangerous for us if we are to get the full public backing of being a devolved decision-making organisation, because it should feel like we are representing the people and not just the technocrats, to get their balances, so their budgets balanced. And I would like us to review how this decision was made, because these are multi-million-pound decisions, and these haven't been taken to the local authority executive board level decision making to get a thorough looking at, and that ward members who are affected could also be included and reassured about what has been decided on their behalf. And I think we are also in danger of following the example of government ministers in overly reassuring about how many of these schemes are still on the table and will still be fulfilled, because that's the kind of rhetoric that we got from Westminster, and they did not deliver because the money wasn't there. And I'd like to know how we have got such a high expectation that that money will finally turn up when we're entering a cost of living crisis and our economy has been damaged by the mismanagement from Whitehall.
Thank you for your comments. Firstly, I would hope that we are not economically so illiterate as government that we will not tank our economy by £30 billion. And also, when you talk, Councillor, that it is damaging and dangerous, I would suggest that what would have been damaging and dangerous would be to spend far too long consulting community groups when we have committees that are plugged into their communities, when we have an urgent crisis on our hands. And of course, papers are published and you as a representative can talk to communities and feedback in the usual manner. But what I would suggest is we needed to act swiftly at pace to make sure that we didn't end up in the situation that we see in Westminster. But I wonder, Melanie, if you'd like to talk about who was consulted.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thanks for the question. So I think the issue for us is that most of the projects are continuing to the next decision point. So we are continuing to work the business cases through for those projects. And as part of that business case development, we do consultation with local residents, with local businesses and people that are affected by the scheme. So we will continue to do the consultation on the schemes, but what we will make clear is where if we don't know where the funding will come from. And just in terms of future funding, I mean, we have moved to a model where we've got a 5-year settlement for sustainable transport, and we have the first of those 5-year settlements. We then are already planning for what we might put forward in the second settlement, and some of those schemes could be some of these schemes that are ready to go and they're on the blocks. So it's helping us to plan for some of those future programmes, but we're not stopping consulting with local residents and local communities. That will continue on a project by project basis as it has done up till this point. So that will continue.
Thank you, Melanie. Any further comments? Ben, and then Councillor Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. It's just a follow-on really to Melanie's points, which is that one of the things that we're arguing for, and other MCAs are as well, as part of greater devolution, is the move towards what we might call a single settlement, where, and this echoes Alan's points from earlier, where we move away from very specific programmes towards more general pots of capital funding that can be deployed to meet the needs of West Yorkshire. So I think we should expect that what becomes important to us going forward will be what's in the programme, not necessarily what funding stream is it attached to, because we need to be more agile and flexible about that going forwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Paulson.
Thank you. I know out there in the public, a lot of people had comments about park and ride schemes without the parking. So hopefully that will still happen, because that's rather an odd one. But just two queries really. One is, looking on the appendix, is this a full appendix of all the schemes? Because I can't see the Silsden-Steeton Bridge anywhere, which was funding through the City Region Sustainable Transport on the list. Apologies if I've missed it somewhere. And the second sort of point or question is, can some of these schemes possibly feed into, as we look at the scoping for mass transit, is there a possibility some of these could feed into that?
Melanie?
Yeah, and just in terms of CRSTS, the list doesn't include CRSTS schemes. It includes the existing programmes where we've got schemes on site, which are the Transport Fund and the TCF programme, so the Transforming Cities Fund. So it includes all of those individual named projects. It doesn't include CRSTS because, bar one exception, we're not making any changes to that programme. So it will be as was submitted to government and has recently been agreed. So there's no changes apart from one that was an additional project that had been added to contribute to over-programming, but we're actually then going to swap some of that funding into a different area. So it doesn't affect CRSTS. And sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Park and ride.
Well, no, mass transit as well, yeah.
Transit, yes, there is definitely an opportunity to look at some of the infrastructure in relation to mass transit as well, whatever that infrastructure might need to be. But yes, there is an opportunity.
And Melanie, would you be happy just to talk about park and ride, the thinking about the park and ride?
Yeah, so we've got the BSIP programme, so the bus priorities, and we want to look at where we can improve the infrastructure on some of our key bus routes. And some of the park and ride schemes obviously are on the same routes. Now, at the moment, we've got park and ride schemes where the demand levels haven't yet returned to pre-pandemic levels. And in the medium term, they are expected to. But at the moment, it's not the right time commercially to think about launching another park and ride site, whether that be, you know, Bradford or Leeds or some of the rail stations. But that is a good, sustainable transport method that we will look at again when the commercial time is right. But at the moment, we wouldn't have a strong commercial case to bring those projects forward, but we would expect to in the future.
Thank you, and I'm a huge fan of Park and Ride, and hasn't Sturton won yet another award? So we will keep a weather eye on that, so thank you. If there's no further comments, are we happy to agree with those recommendations? Thank you so much. So moving on to business planning and budgets. This report proposes amendments to the current year's business plan to reflect in-year changes to budgets and priorities because of the challenges we've all been discussing, and it provides a progress update on the business planning process and the budget situation. We're being asked for a sense of our priorities for delivery for 2023 and 24 and have proposed approach to 23-24 budget. This recognises the current economic situation makes budget setting incredibly difficult for everyone in local government, including ourselves and, of course, our local authority partners who are really struggling over the next few months. We're therefore seeking to manage our inflationary pressures without increasing costs to our partner authorities. We're working on a transport levy freeze and looking to contain our non-transport costs within existing funding. So if I could hand over to Angela to take us through the report in more detail.
Thank you, Mayor. As you've outlined there in the introduction, that the paper gives an update on current year business planning, budget, and then the approach for both of those for 2023-24. As you said, and has been apparent through the conversation, we've revised the in-year business plans reflecting the cost of living and cost of doing business crisis and some of the capacity and resource issues that we've had. So that's covered in the report and is there for noting. In terms of the current year budget, we've obviously been keeping an eye on that in terms of inflation and how that plays across. We are currently seeking to bring that in with the same balanced budget we set out at the start of the year. Members will recall we have brought papers previously moving some of the budget from concessionary travel, where we've been able to make some savings. We've moved that across to bus tendered services, where it has been particularly difficult to manage the costs of bus tendered services in the current inflationary environment and the difficult world that the bus operators are navigating through. We are hoping to get that budget gap. There is still a small gap. We're hoping to get that closed by the time we bring back the full budget in February for you. As the Mayor said, budget setting for 2023-24 is incredibly difficult for everybody. Mindful of the difficult decisions our local authority partners are taking, we have proposed trying to manage with a transport levy freeze so that we'll try and contain those costs for our transport services within existing budget. That will rely to an extent on us using some savings on concessions. We've managed to put a little money aside from the concessions last year. We'll do the same this year. That would tide us through next year, we hope. It's all based on assumptions and estimates, clearly, because the world of bus tendered services is incredibly difficult. Government funding for recovery purposes falls away. Passenger behaviours and patterns are not yet re-established at a steady level. So it's still a very volatile environment in which to operate, but we are clearly focused on trying to maintain the bus services that are currently provided through combined authority funding. So we hope that by using concessions and tendered service funding together a bit, we can try and get through next year while we use next year to look at the current funding model, the services that are provided, see how the BSIP money plays through, look again at how some of the services are funded, and try and ensure we have a viable position beyond next year. we are looking to realign the budget in line with the new focus on business planning. So you'll see in Appendix 3 the reflection of the item in the paper later on about the new directorate structure, looking at outcomes, and we're currently trying to realign our detailed budgets to fit behind those the outcome focus that we're taking going forward. So what you've got at the moment is a summary as we try to move the budgets into that new detailed format. As I say, we're trying to manage bus tendered services, and we're then trying to manage our other costs within the funding envelope we currently have, recognising inflation is running across a number of budget lines, but not across the income. As the Mayor pointed out earlier, we don't get increases in inflation on much of the funding coming from government. So there is still some work to do to try and close a budget gap for next year. The budget gap increases in the following years. Our current focus is to work through next year, and then again focus during next year on what we can do for future years. We have put a sort of mid-position forward as a starting point. We are doing some sensitivity analyses on things like salaries and tendered services in particular, which are some of our bigger areas of spend. And we'll be reviewing the income forecasts we've got and I think we probably will need to be a bit more aggressive about where and how we can find further funding, as government funding doesn't appear to be increasing, and certainly we still haven't got confirmation of all the funding that we might normally expect. We have a number of briefings in the diary and on their way into diaries to ensure members have an opportunity to go through the detail between now and February. Briefing local authority finance directors next week on the proposals and the detail. And we will also be doing our usual public engagement. We put some information out on our website showing where our funding's going and what it's achieving. And we intend to do that very shortly also. I'll pause there and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Galton.
Thanks, Matt. First thing is item 2.10. It talks about your substantial restructure and how it was subject to an LGA peer review. First of all, I just want to welcome the fact that we've been involved with the LGA to get a peer review in, because any organisation needs to have fresh perspective on what their plans are and critiques. So I was just wondering how that review will be shared across the board so that we're aware of what corporately we're hoping to achieve through those conclusions. And then the second thing is the income generation. There's a paragraph here about how we will look to see how we can improve our income generation across our asset base. Who would be leading on that investigation, and when will it report?
Thank you. I'll go to Alan, then to Ben.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Galton. So you're referring to the LGA review that we had of the communications function. Very happy to circulate the report to members of the board, along with a note about how we are implementing the recommendations from it. There are a range of recommendations around how we put in place the capacity, resilience, correct processes, right strategy, etc. And in many ways, what was provided was an endorsement of plans that we had already got in place, but with some additional assistance with us to help improve. And I welcome your comments about it being a good move for the organisation to receive that external help, and in particular, some of the links that we made with the people on that review team have continued providing support to members of the team. So, but short answer, yes, happy to circulate, but along with a note about how we're responding to it.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Mayor. So we're also in discussions with the LGA about them doing a peer review of the entire organisation at the end of next year, when we will have had the new structure in, and we'll be able to see how it's performing. And we're in constant dialogue with the LGA about how we best learn from their experiences. And indeed, yesterday I fed into a review of the LGA, so it's working both ways at the moment. On your second question about income generation, I think the short answer is that the overall responsibility sits with Angela as Director of Finance, but individual directors have targets within their business plans, depending on what income generation facilities they've got within their directorate.
And also just to flag that the Accelerator Fund, if I'm correct, is also meant to be an income generator for businesses. So we're trying to be innovative as well. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Mayor. It was just a question in relation to bus routes. The change in passenger usage has meant that many that didn't used to require subsidy, bus companies are coming forward and requesting it. The question I would raise is, you previously talked about cross-border transport links, but that was between the 5 districts within West Yorkshire. It's just that there are some bus routes that go out outside, and therefore it's understanding the work that will be done to maintain those as much as possible. I was thinking of 412, and there may be others that you get the email from a company not expecting that route was non-viable. I'm thinking, and also the Zap bus has gone, sadly, and that was a very good link between York and Leeds.
Dave, if I could come to you.
Yes, I mean we've had quite a year, and I'm sure Councillor Waller and your colleagues have as well, in terms of bus operators identifying routes that are less viable or not viable. Our approach generally tends to be that if an operator has done that, then we will look at what the required need is and not necessarily jump to either subsidising that company and that route, but to try and address the sort of connectivity issue that emerges if that service isn't there. We're not sort of automatically starting to fund services we weren't funding before. There have been a small number that it has been necessary to do that over the year, but we haven't done that in a larger sense. That said, we participated with the bus operators in a request the Department for Transport asked earlier in the year to identify the services which are marginal, the ones that could be at risk, particularly if the subsidy level that's coming from government at the moment on an emergency basis comes to an end, and we must plan and assume that that does happen at the end of March. And so there is, we sort of stand at a position of seeing that there might be some further services and issues we need to deal with, but I think it's important that we separate the issues that the service withdrawal creates from simply a sort of stepping in to financially prop up the service.
Thank you, Dave. And if I may just reiterate what Dave said about operators withdrawing routes and then looking to us to then fund them to run the route they've already been running. It's holding a gun to our heads, and I think we will, and I've instructed Dave and his team to do everything in their power to ensure that connectivity without rewarding companies who are pulling services to then run a service that we think is socially necessary. So it is difficult in this market, though, because there are very few other smaller bus operators. So it is a real struggle for the team, but we're doing everything we can to make that effective. Dave?
I'm just conscious I probably didn't answer the second part of Councillor Waller's question around cross-boundary. I mean, I think we would regard cross-boundary services in the same way as I've described. If there are communities that are affected on the other side of the boundary, we will obviously work closely with the respective local transport authority to find some sort of mutual solution, and we had an example of doing that in South Yorkshire with South Yorkshire earlier in the year.
Thank you. Councillor Galton.
Thanks, Mayor. Yes, I think it would be really useful because, as the Mayor has pointed out, bus service reductions and withdrawals have a huge impact on communities. It would be really useful that when a bus company approaches the combined authority to negotiate some kind of settlement for a particular route, it would be really useful if the combined authority notified the elected members on the affected route that those discussions were actually taking place, and that they could actually report back how they have been resolved or not. Because at the moment, local communities, it's very murky, the world of discourse between the combined authority and bus companies, and we approach the bus companies and get very limited information back, but they are not politically accountable, and this organisation is, and it would be useful if this organisation took the responsibility of taking back to those communities which are affected the conclusions of their deliberations.
Councillor Hinchcliffe, then Councillor Lewis, and then back to Dave.
I mean, Councillor Galton's just highlighting the endemic weaknesses in the fact that it's a deregulated bus network. So, but what I think you also just need to be mindful of is that we've got a transport committee of cross-party members from across West Yorkshire, and there are bus engagement leads from each of the 5 authorities who are tasked with connecting with local councillors as well. So there is that in place, but of course officers are subject to commercial confidentiality with some of these conversations, which they're not allowed to say anything about. And again, that goes back to the fact, and the Mayor's spoken about it frequently, that she gets very frustrated about the fact that we don't have control over all the buses, and I'm afraid that's just as it is, and that's what the situation has been inherited. So. Sorry?
They can still report back. Sorry, Chair. They can still report back the conclusions. They don't have to talk about figures. They can, because as David just mentioned, you have a look at what the bus companies put forward to you, and then you make a decision as to whether or not it merits subsidy from the centre based on bus usage. And that is something which doesn't have to have commercially sensitive information in it to be reported back.
I think it's a very fast moving chessboard of potential routes that could or couldn't go. But just to Councillor Hinchcliffe's point, that there is a process set up to feed back to communities and to councillors. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you. I mean, Susan said part of what I was going to say about this is just a nonsense of a deregulated bus system, you know, where residents, us, the combined authority, find out exactly the same time what bus companies plan to do. Not any sense of consultation that would seem logical around what most people consider a public service, but just find out the bus companies are cutting services and that's absolutely clear. I'm absolutely clear around the need to reform the system. So we have, I mean, we shouldn't have consultation around service cuts. We should have the buses running as we want them, serving our communities. And the problem, I don't believe, is with we've touched on the processes here. I don't believe the problem's here. I think the problem's with the system and the behaviour of the bus companies, and that's what we need to sort out.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Any further comments? Dave.
Yeah, just a little bit of clarity on the process in response to Councillor Galton's question. The process for making any change to a bus service is that the bus operators must register that with the Traffic Commissioner 2 months before it happens, and ahead of that, they are required to share their intentions with the combined authority in terms of a sort of consultation period, if you want to call it that, in that process. So. The point at which we would and do share with ward members and other affected members and the Transport Committee, as Councillor Hinchcliffe said, is in that moment when the bus operators have made more formally their intention to do something, but they haven't perhaps registered it formally and put it in the public domain, and that's the sort of process. I think it's important we have a dialogue with bus operators. We know what they're thinking, we know the direction of travel, and there will be some what ifs in those conversations. But as soon as they actually sort of formally say it is our intention to do this, then we will start a process that would, in sort of, consultation is probably not the right word here, because to a certain extent it's, you know, they're telling us what they're going to do, and we're sharing that with ward members. So we generally do that at the appropriate point in time, but it's a fairly late point in time in terms of any actions that can be taken arising from it.
And also, just during those consultations, the powers of persuasion from us are limited to some degree. I would like to thank Dave and your team for some of those really extensive cuts, the operators have been pulled back from the brink because they serve our communities. So we are doing our best to make sure there are less cuts than bus companies seem to want to offer.
And we do have the information which we had from earlier in the year in terms of the things that they were considering doing and not doing. So to a certain extent, the dialogue we're having with them at the moment is if this funding comes to an end in March, do these cuts come back onto the into play? And if they do, obviously then we'll start engaging with members.
And if I may just very quickly remind people that the bus recovery grant was coming to an end. The mayors and others made a very strong case to government. They extended the bus recovery grant, but then bus companies continued to cut routes. And that bus recovery grant is now coming to an end again, and we're going to see another cliff edge. And I'm hoping and making the case to the new Transport Minister and government that we can't continue like this, going from cliff edge to cliff edge. We need a bus service that works for everybody across West Yorkshire so we can take up opportunities and jobs and not force people into very expensive taxes in a cost of living crisis. Any further comments? Lovely, thank you. Are we happy to approve the recommendations? Great, thank you. Moving on to item 8. To approve our culture, heritage and sport framework for the region. I'm really grateful for all the hard work our colleagues on the Culture Committee have done over the last year. I think it's excellent, sets out the exciting times we have ahead for us over the coming years. In Bradford, we launched our creative showcase, and the data in that was very exciting that this sector contributes £2 billion a year to our regional economy and is one of the only growing creative sectors outside of London and Scotland. So it's something we should be hugely proud of. And over the next few years, we're going to be showing off our creative talents with those years of culture, starting with Leeds 2023, Kirklees Year of Music, Calderdale and Wakefield's Years of Culture in 24, and culminating in Bradford as UK's City of Culture 2025. So this was discussed and approved at the Culture, Heritage and Sport Committee on the 28th of October. And with their input and further discussions with stakeholders, we've begun to develop a programme of investment which aligns with the key themes and interventions of this framework and will be delivered at pace over the next few months. If I can hand over to Phil Wycherley, our new Interim Director of Inclusive Economy, Skills and Culture, to provide detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to that introduction, as the Mayor said, this is our final proposed versions of the culture framework. This is based on the version that this committee approved in the summer to go out for consultation. And it has gone out to consultation both in the form of our Your Voice consultation online tool, but also in a series of events and consultation events with communities which build on kind of our earlier events we had earlier in the year. The result of that consultation was that people that responded agreed with our overall priorities and gave us some kind of feedback that enriched kind of what we put in this overall framework. And as the Mayor said, what we need to do now is use this framework to guide our investment. This is guiding what one of our investment priorities, but also where we might collaborate with others. And this has been worked on with very, very closely with our local authority partners. But also kind of Arts Council England, Yorkshire Sport and a variety of other partners about how we might be able to collaborate, unlock other investment as well and broker that investment. In terms of the actual framework, it's kind of organised around 4 different themes. 2 of those are place and people, where the focus will clearly be around our years of culture, but also how we might be working potentially with NHS partners on social prescribing, and getting a partnership there to kind of really support our communities, particularly those communities which don't have as easy access to culture, heritage and sport as some of our other communities. And the other 2 priorities are our skills and economy. So the Mayor spoke about the event we had on Monday in Bradford around our export sector, and it's right that we've got a £2 billion sector here with some really, really great businesses from the larger side, from Channel 4 and Production Park, to kind of smaller businesses across the region, really kind of innovating and growing, and and it's a real sector we can be proud of and grow. So we're thinking about interventions there, both regionally and linked to our years of culture. And also on the skills side, there's a real vibrant discussion around improving the diversity of the sector. It's a sector in some cases has relied on kind of connections and kind of backgrounds for jobs, and we wanted to kind of widen that, building on some of the success we've already had on the Mayor's Green Diversity Programme, but trying to do a bit more of that. And also we want to kind of think about kind of the resilience and the confidence of a sector which is often predominantly freelancing and sector. And then the final point I'd like to make, and it's been borne out in some of the conversations, is this is a relatively new area for the combined authority. It's an area where we have to think about kind of how we measure and evaluate. So we have got we've got a renewed focus within the combined authority, thinking about that, thinking how we kind of draw the links between the years of culture as well, and how we kind of measure and evaluate our success, working with our internal teams and research and intelligence team, but also through colleagues like Ben Wormsley, who's a national expert on cultural evaluation, who sits on the culture committee, but also is a University of Leeds academic. How we kind of work together to evaluate that and kind of learn from what we've invested in and make sure we continue to do the right things going forward. So I think we just need to. I'll happy to take any questions on that.
Thank you. Just to reiterate, this is a growing sector. And it's not just a nice to have, it's about jobs and skills and training, regeneration and well-being. It's a really important part of our offer to the people of West Yorkshire. Any comments? Yes, Councillor Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. No, really, really great to have the final one now in front of us. It was a bit disappointing, there's only 137 members of the public actually fed back. I mean, it's good that they were positive, but we're a big area, West Yorkshire, so that was a bit disappointing. But something I just wanted to feed back as well. Yesterday, we're on a bit of an LGA link today, aren't we? I was on the Culture, Tourism and Sport Board yesterday, and we had Visit England doing a presentation about their review into destination management organisations. And I don't know how much the combined authority has to do with this, but they're now looking for local visitor economy partnerships, about 40 of them to be set up across the country. From what they're saying, it looks like the combined authority would be a perfect partner to work alongside Visit England on that. And obviously we're aware of the history of Welcome to Yorkshire, so we won't go there. But from what they're looking to roll out, it looks like we'd be a really good partner to maybe look into that and link up. So I know they're going to be looking for expressions of interest. So I don't know if that's something we're already looking at as a combined authority or if something can be taken forward maybe.
Thank you, Councillor Paulson, for that positive response. I do agree with you about members of the public, but my understanding is people are like, oh yeah, it's really good. And so they didn't spend the time on going into the questions. But with regard to your tourism suggestion, I think Welcome to Yorkshire, you're absolutely right. Didn't that end disastrously? But the Yorkshire leaders are looking at an option. But I also think personally that we are in a unique position with our years of culture, and it may be something that we could build on that comes out of years of culture as a tourism offer as well. Obviously that's going to take further thought, but thank you for that contribution, and you're right that this would be a very good time to put West Yorkshire on the map as a destination for tourism for our cities, rural, but also for our creative offer as well. Thank you. I don't know, Phil, if you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, a couple of comments on that. So always good to have comments from the member for Worth Valley and the home of one of our cultural heritage people in the Brontes kind of made comments on this. So on the responses, we had quite a large level of engagement on the web page for the consultation web page, but quite a low number of responses from the public. So there was a more detailed report that went to the culture committee that kind of outlined some of those statistics and some of those facts. But I think it's something that it's hard to interpret what that means, but we did quite a lot. We had quite a lot of effort to encourage people to respond over the summer, and it went alongside a conversation on buses, a consultation on buses as well. And we promoted them both quite heavily on social media. I would say that we did also extend the consultation because the closing date was in the middle of September, and because of the passing of the Queen, we decided we needed to extend it to do further comms around that as well. So we did every effort to do that, and we were monitoring that, and that was disappointing. But in terms of the comments made around the DMO, yeah, as the Mayor said, we're thinking about that too.
Super, thank you. Are we happy to approve the recommendations in this paper? Great stuff. Okay, moving on to 9A, project approvals, investment priority 4, tackling the climate emergency and environmental sustainability. It's 2 parts, A and B. The project approvals reports provide details of schemes recommended to the MCA for progression through the assurance process and is split into investment priorities. I'd like to invite Melanie Corcoran, Director of Transport and Delivery, to outline the scheme for consideration under investment priority 4, tackling the climate emergency, environmental sustainability, followed by schemes for consideration under investment priority 5, future transport. I think we'll take it one at a time and then get approvals on that. Thank you. Melanie.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So the first project for consideration is IP4, which is tackling the climate emergency and environmental sustainability. And just to set the context, the West Yorkshire investment strategy identified 6 areas for investment that would form part of our Wave 1 work. So just a reminder of what they are. So it was Better Homes Hub, it was Better Neighbourhoods, it was business sustainability, which is the element that we're going to consider today, flooding and drainage, green skills and training, and solar panels and battery storage. So they were the areas that we said this will form Wave 1, and we're working up those programmes. So the first one for consideration here, we'd already talked about in the earlier item the cost of living and the need to put some emergency support for SMEs in place. This is a proposal to start a programme from the 1st of April where we will be helping SMEs that are facing a significant number of challenges relating to net zero. Often, you know, where do they start? What do they need to be looking at to make the most impact? And we've talked about the current climate and those rising costs. So this package will provide simplified, consistent and impartial support to SMEs to act as a catalyst to help them to plan for net zero and the activities that they would need to do. It will make them more resilient to the effects of climate change, and the support is designed to help them to measure their carbon impact, look at their climate readiness, and plan and make improvements, and then be able to act on those to reduce their environmental impact. So the proposal is, at the moment, this is a strategic outline case, and there's further development work that's required on a full business case. So the recommendation here is that we approve the strategic outline case and the scheme moves into the development of the full business case. It's a joint decision, I think, actually, Phil, on this one. So we're looking at both of them together, and then work can commence on delivery. So the total value of the scheme is over 21.9 million, and the funding that's required from the combined authority is up to 11,696,934, and we're asking for 10.596 to be released at this stage. So the recommendation is that we approve the business case as a joint decision point, and it will move into delivery and is due to launch in April.
Thank you, Melanie. And just to double check that the rest of the money is match funded by the businesses.
Yes.
Very good. Any comments? Yes, Mark.
Thank you, Matt. And I guess just to add 2 points, if I may. The first is this is a programme, part of a package, but it builds on the last 6 years of 2 very similar schemes. Firstly, the ERDF-funded Resource Efficiency Fund, also then the ReBiz programme, which is very popular with businesses. Worth highlighting that annually, those schemes are saving 4,500 tonnes of carbon, of CO2, reducing electric and gas bills and all of the money that provides. And I think we know that there is more to do. Melanie highlighted that SMEs sometimes don't know where to start. That's very true. Small businesses in our region account for 50% of business-related emissions. 89% say sustainability is important, but 69% don't know how to measure them. And so this really helps with that, and I think it's a very popular scheme from the business world. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Any further comments? Great, we're happy to recommend. It's a joint recommendation. Yeah, lovely, thank you. So let's move on to the next item, item B. Melanie.
Thank you, Mayor. So the next area that we're looking at is investment priority 5, future transport. So we're looking at supporting sustainable transport methods. The first scheme for consideration, combined services and assets database replacement, or COSA, which you may recognise. So the proposal here is that we look at a new IT system which will replace the current one and enable us to continue to meet our statutory obligation to provide bus travel information and network management. It will enable us to create and manage bus services, bus stops, infrastructure in real time. So we need to do this. Relatively small amount. The total value of the scheme is 615,000. And that full amount is to come from the combined authority. At this stage, we'd like to release 50,000 to continue to work on the business justification case. So this is decision point 1, strategic assessment, and we'd like to move to business justification case.
Thank you. Any comments? Yes, Councillor Galton.
Thanks, Mayor. The Mayor has put significant effort into trying to improve bus patronage across West Yorkshire, the most significant input being the Mayor's Fares initiative. However, we've all discussed about how erratic our bus services have been of late, and getting the confidence of the car user to switch onto buses isn't simply a financial imperative for them. They also need to make sure that they can actually get to work on time. And the real-time bus information, which is available at bus stops and online, is key to providing that confidence, and it currently isn't there. And there's much discussion about ghost buses. Now, we know that some of that is about information which is provided by bus operators, but also key to it is our own commissioned real-time bus information system. Now, I realise that this system isn't that system, but it implies, through the description of the paper, that it is the underlying substructure which would allow an improvement to that real-time bus information system. You can confirm that or not for me, can't you? So one of the things I would like to emphasise is the combined authority really needs to get a grasp of that real-time bus information if the investment made through the Mayor's Fares is not to be wasted, because we need to get that quantum lift in bus patronage, don't we, over the next few months to do that. So can this procurement be accelerated in some way if it is the cornerstone of improving, ultimately, better information for passengers?
Thank you. Dave, do you want to comment?
Yes. Councillor Galton quite correctly says the importance of the real-time bus information to passenger confidence is well understood, and it's also understood that particularly with their level of change and fluctuation of bus services, some of that confidence has been dented a little bit. I won't go into a long description of how the sort of phantom bus, ghost bus thing can happen, but I think it's important and we are dealing with the various different components that influence that and create it, and we've set up a piece of work to do that very thing, because it's about the system, it's about the way the system's being used by the bus operators, and it's also about the data going into the system. The system that we're talking about here is the process by which the bus timetables go into that real-time system. So it's at the very beginning of that conveyor belt, if you like. And so to some extent what that does is it's absolutely important that the data that goes into the system in terms of the scheduling and the routing goes into the real-time system so that it's actually comparing against what it should be. So the COSA system that's mentioned here is part of, but not the entire solution to addressing the real-time system. We've also invested quite a lot over the last 18 months in the technology that sits behind that, and so we're really looking at the sort of operational, practical, and the data integrity issues that are probably impacting it at the moment. So we're aware of all the different moving parts of that to improve the real-time information system and getting a bit of external validation to make sure that everything fits together properly.
Thank you, but rest assured, this is it keeps me awake at night, these darn Ghostbusters, because in my privileged role as to bus stop, I can say the bus didn't come because sometimes members of the public say I was there and the bus didn't come, and the bus company says, no, it's on our schedule that it was there. Whereas in my privileged position, I can say I was at the bus stop and it definitely wasn't there. So we will be continuing to make reliability a priority. Where we have the power, we will do everything we can to make it more reliable. Are we happy to approve these recommendations? Thank you. And on to the final part.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, the second scheme is a TCF scheme in Bradford City Centre. This is the walking and cycling improvements that are proposed in Bradford. It will make it easier for people to travel around the city centre on foot, cycle and public transport, creating a centre that's comfortable, safe and an enjoyable place to be. So we'll be looking at a range of improvements that include new public spaces, seating areas, artwork, and we'll create new bus hubs at key locations on bus routes as well. There'll be new protected cycle tracks and new upgraded pedestrian and cycle crossings. So it's a significant investment. It's one of the schemes that has been prioritised to deliver this before Bradford City of Culture. So it's one of the schemes where, when we talked about the previous report, there's funding that's allocated for this to move forward. So the proposal here is that we approve this outline business case and work then commences on the full business case. So the funding request is for 3.741 million to be released to continue that development work, and the total value of the funding from the combined authority is 43.166 million. And work, the recommendation is that work proceeds on that development of the scheme.
Thank you. And having had a walk around with Homes England and others on a number of occasions, it's a really exciting scheme, the whole thing. Any comments? Thank you, Councillor Galton.
Thanks, Mayor. We've got quite considerable experience of transport-related schemes in Leeds City Centre. And looking at this scheme, the same thing seems to be happening in Bradford potentially, in that a lot of public realm investment is subject to transport washing. So there's a lot of money here, and it's supposed to be about transport, and a lot of it is actually about making pavements and buildings look prettier. And I'm just wondering whether the cost-benefit ratio that's in here, how is that reached? And I appreciate that this is Bradford's decision and I'm from Leeds, but I'm aware that some of the current investment that we've had very recently hasn't helped transport infrastructure to work very effectively, especially around City Square. And I would hate to see another authority make the same mistake. And actually, in my role, I am supposed to represent my party across the sub-region, so I hope you'll excuse the impertinence of me questioning how much transport benefit we are getting out of this scheme.
Councillor Lewis.
I don't think I've ever heard so much rubbish from Councillor Golden, and that's quite a high standard that's been set. There are, across Leeds, the work that's happened in Leeds, there have been significant transport benefits. People walk on pavements, and having much better pavements for people to walk on is a transport benefit in itself, and clearly there is disruption when roadworks happen. I know opposition councillors believe The luxury of opposition means that you can believe that you blink and road and changes and investment in transport infrastructure happens. It's not how it works in the real world, and there has been disruption. We've always acknowledged that. I think the big test for me around Leeds City Centre is that when schemes have happened, nobody's come to me and said, you should dig all that up and put it back as it was, you know. Nobody's ever said to me, I used to, when I was at school, which was a very long time ago, I used to work at a shop on Briggate of a weekend when it was 3 lanes of traffic plying through the city centre. Nobody's ever come to me and said, actually, what Leeds really needs is traffic going back up Briggate. More recent schemes like the Corn Exchange and Cookridge Street, nobody's come back to me and said, actually, dig those parks up and put tarmac and traffic back. So we always acknowledge there is disruption when these schemes happen. I know opposition politicians love to say, oh, well, of course we want transport investment and we want it to happen in the blink of an eyelid without any disruption happening, and we're really shocked and surprised that work does cause disruption. That's a luxury of opposition. But it does, you know, it has been really successful in the city centre. We've had the city centre in Leeds is now busier over weekends than it was before lockdown, and clearly that has economic benefits as well. I'd love to find a scheme that is purely transport spending, doesn't cover anything else, but clearly looking at the remit of the combined authority, we've seen the improvements in Leeds, and we've seen that pipeline of private sector investment in the city as well. We've got billions of private sector investment lined up for the city centre, and it comes all part of the big project, and that's the overall things we want to see, Mayor.
Thank you. And just to add to that point, often there's the sense that we should wear a bit of a hair shirt and we shouldn't have nice things. And I think having an aspiration and having a design for our city centres, what we want to be like European cities where it's pleasurable to move about our city, to encourage active travel. I think it's all part of the bigger picture where we want to get people back into our city centres, not necessarily only for retail and leisure, but also because it's an enjoyable experience. And I would credit the dinosaurs for bringing more families into the Leeds City Centre than ever before. And I thought that was quite an ambitious and creative project. But Melanie, if you'd like to come back.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. The BCR on this scheme, the benefit cost ratio, is very high in terms of the transport. Well, government set the criteria. So, you know, we have to use the tag appraisal process, and we do a green book appraisal as per HM Treasury. So that is set out. If we are using funding that has come from DFT, we have to use that appraisal. So we are measuring the transport benefits and monetising those benefits to arrive at the BCR, and it's very high. We've seen some schemes come forward where there is a significant amount of public realm, and it will bring the BCR down from a transport point of view. This is not one of those schemes. The BCR is 2.5 to 1, which is very high value for money.
Thank you, Melanie. Councillor Hinchcliffe.
Yeah, I mean, I just like to say I think Bradford's worth it, Councillor Galton. So as you'll have seen from what Melanie just said, the business case ratio as set by government, which is applied nationally, shows that this is a very good scheme from an investment point of view. And also for us, there was a survey last week about green cities, and you know, some places in West Yorkshire we didn't do as fare well as other places. We need to increase the amount of green space there is in our city centre as well. There need to be more livable places. People want to dwell, want to spend time, want to spend their money there, and therefore this is all part of envisaging that for the future. And of course, we're going to be City of Culture, a national UK City of Culture in 2025, and this is all part of us preparing for that. It's going to be a great place to be in 2025. You're going to want to come and enjoy that space, Councillor Galton, and you'll be very welcome.
Thank you, as will every Liberal Democrat voter in the whole of West Yorkshire, because, because we're doing this for everyone. So thank you very much for your great intervention, Councillor Galton. Okay, are we happy to approve this recommendation? Yes, thank you. Okay, moving on to item 10, committee appointments. This is seeking the approval of the Mayoral Combined Authority to appoint a new private sector deputy chair of culture, heritage, media and sport. committee. It's the vacancy has arisen as a consequence that we've lost the lovely Helen Featherstone, who's moving on to a new role with public sector organisation in January 2023. You remember she works at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park. We wish her, or did do, she's moving on, and we wish her well in that new role. And as chair of the Culture Committee, I want to give in public my personal thanks for her support to me and to our committee. So following a process of seeking expressions of interest at its meeting on the 1st of December, the LEP board recommended that Nikki Chance-Thompson takes the role of deputy chair with immediate effect. And Nikki, as you will all know, I'm sure, is the queen behind the Peace Hall that has turned the Peace Hall around, obviously with the support from Sir Roger Marsh, into the go-to destination in the north. Are we happy to agree this recommendation? We are, thank you. Okie doke, so moving on to item 11, and thank you to my colleagues for leaving the room for this item, director roles and appointments. This report sets out an update on progress to implementing the organisation's new outcome-focused operating model, as we agreed in June, including changes to the senior structure and director appointments. This programme of organisational change is really important to ensure the outcomes that we want to achieve at speed rather than process, and having outcomes drive our work and the people of West Yorkshire see maximum benefit. So if I could hand over to Ben Still, Chief Executive, to take us through the detail.
Thank you, Chair. So I won't repeat much of the detail. You'll recall that you took decisions as the Combined Authority in June and July meetings, setting out and moving to this structure, but we didn't at that point ask you to approve it. So the first recommendation that we're asking you to take this morning is to approve the new structure that's set out in Figure 1 in the paper. We have since then been through what's called a management of change process to move existing directors into these new roles, and that is set out in Table 1, and that is for your ratification, please. And we're then seeking your approval for us to progress to recruit to the vacant director roles that remain in our structure. In particular, the immediate actions we want to pursue are for the Executive Director of Transport and for the Mass Transit Director. So we're looking for your approval for that. There's then two individuals, as the Mayor has alluded to. We had a vacancy in the Director of Inclusive Economy, Skills and Culture, and we've looked to appoint on an interim basis Phil Wycherley into that post while we undertake a substantive external recruitment. And the same is true for the Chief Operating Officer post, where we've run an internal competition, and on an interim basis we'd like to appoint Melanie Corcoran into that role from the 1st of January, again during the period, lasting for the period while we're running an external recruitment process. All of those changes then require some changes to the officers that support individual committees, and the paper sets out a table for everyone's information around which directors are accountable in their responsibilities for each committee. So those are essentially the recommendations, and I welcome your views or comments.
Thank you. Any comments? No. Thank you all. Happy to approve. Thank you so much. Brilliant. So moving on to item 12, maybe someone can tell our colleagues they can come back in. Officer arrangements. So following changes made to the senior officer structure, revisions are needed to the scheme of delegation from the authority to senior officers, reflecting obviously these changed new titles and roles. And this report annexes a draft revised scheme for member consultation and approval. And it seeks authority for the Chief Executive to discharge functions that have previously been delegated by the authority, its committees, to named officers whose roles may now have changed, and allows the Chief Executive to delegate those where appropriate. The Constitution and other key documents will also be updated in due course. Are we all happy to agree the recommendations? We are. Thank you all very much. And welcome back to colleagues. And for information, we have minutes for information. There's any comments on minutes for information? No. thank you all, everybody, for coming today. And this is our last meeting before Christmas. The next one is the 2nd of February, 2023. There are no mince pies because we're in a cost of living crisis. So I'd like to close the meeting and wish you all a very restful Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and another great year ahead pending. Thank you all.